So I think we're going to get started here. It's 11:59 in Fort Atkinson, Wisconsin. I'm Corey Geiger, editor of Hoards Dairyman, and I'd really like to welcome you to this webinar today. Hoards Dairyman and the University of Illinois have been co-hosting these presentations since 2011. It definitely takes a team to produce these webinars, and we surely appreciate the work of our webinar producer, Jim Baltz, at the University of Illinois, and our Hoards Dairyman media manager, Patty Hirchin, who pulls together the details behind the scenes here. My co-host today is the well-known and well-respected and the National Dairy Shrine Guest of Honor this year, Dr. Michael Hutchins from the University of Illinois. Together, Mike and I have the pleasure of welcoming Joe Dalton, our webinar presenter today, who will be talking about synchronization strategies for heifers. And we're very excited to hear this presentation. If you're listening to the presentation live, you do have access to the PDF document of the slides. You can print that out. That handout can be found by going to GoToWebinar panel on your screen and just click down on the handout section. So Mike, let's kick off this great webinar.
Well, very good, Corey. It's my distinct pleasure and honor to introduce our leader today, and that is Dr. Joe Dalton. He's a professor and extension dairy specialist at the University of Idaho. Joe grew up in California, did his undergraduate work at Cal Poly, master's degree at Utah State University, and finished with his doctorate degree at Virginia Tech. His area is in reproduction, as Corey already mentioned here at this point, including synchronization programs and genomics. He's given presentations all around the United States, South America, Europe, and Asia. So, Joe, it is our distinct pleasure to welcome you to the first time to the Hoards webinar, and the program is yours.
Thank you very much, both Corey and Mike. Appreciate that. Welcome, everybody, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to wherever you are. We're going to go ahead and begin talking about a few synchronization strategies for dairy heifers.
So we start out right away with a poll question to kind of find out where our people are at. So what strategy do you use? The polls are now open, so all our listeners, you should be voting now. What strategy do you use when looking at synchronizing replacement heifers? And the first choice is I do not synchronize. The second one, prostaglandin. The third one is going to be a GRH dash 5-day CIDR, prostaglandin, GnRH, then 7-day CIDR with prostaglandin, and then a 14-day CIDR with prostaglandin. And for some of us, that's almost like another alphabet to hear. But I'm sure, Joe, you're going to fill us in a little bit on these as we go on. Corey, any comments, or are you voting?
I'll tell you what. I can't vote, of course, since I'm a co-presenter. But given my travel in that, with the heifers, I'm putting IVF embryos, and I do the GnRH 5-day CIDR, and it works quite well. But I know that one's probably a little bit more expensive than some of the other options on there.
Well, I'm not going to comment because I'd be dangerous to comment at this point. But we do have almost 2/3 of the votes in, and we've invested time. So Jim has closed the poll. And Joe, what do you see there? Are you surprised? Not surprised? What do you think?
No, this doesn't surprise me at all. This is probably, this is right up the alley, and with dairy producers and heifer raisers that I speak with. Yes, we see the vast majority, 38%, do not synchronize. Prostaglandin, most producers feel very comfortable with. It's a kind of a low input, very easy to include with estrus detection. So that would follow at 32%. And then the timed AI, a little more intensive, having GnRH on both ends, 5-day CIDR and prostaglandin. Doesn't surprise me at about 20%. And then the 7-day CIDR is one of the original CIDR programs from way back, and that's about right. And the 14-day CIDR is a new one. So no, it looks pretty very much the way I would expect. So we're going to go ahead, keeping that in mind, and we're on an outline here. We're going to go through a little bit of an introduction to make sure everyone is at kind of the same foundational level. And then we're going to talk about 2 different synchronization strategies today. There are many different synchronization strategies. but we're going to only talk about 2 today. A 14-day CIDR pre-synchronization, which is coupled with prostaglandin, and also this idea of the 5-day CIDR, but with timed artificial insemination. And then we will talk about some management considerations, and we'll end with some take-home messages. So part of this introduction, we've got to go back and understand, make sure we understand that the 3 largest expenses of a dairy business begin with feed for the lactating cow herd, and then we have labor, and then raising replacement heifers. So that kind of puts it into focus how important it is to remember the expenses that are incurred by raising calves, raising replacement heifers, relative to the overall dairy business. And if we look at the heifer raising enterprise, and this doesn't matter if it's heifers raised at home on the home farm, or heifers raised at a heifer ranch, maybe in the West. The largest expense of a heifer raising operation is feed. So then, taking that one step further, we've got to think about this idea of this cost of raising heifers in the terms of how long does it take us to raise them? So what determines days on feed? The terminology we can use, we can borrow essentially from the beef cattle industry. Essentially, we need to think of raising heifers this way. They are going to be on feed for so many days before they calve and return, give us a return on our investment. Well, age at first calving helps to determine days on feed. But age at first calving is something we used to focus on. And really what we should be focusing on is age at conception. And the reason why we should focus on age at conception is because that will determine the age at which that heifer has her first calf.
So now we're ready for our last poll. So you got to better vote now or you'll never get to vote. Here's your choices. What is the length of the breeding period for your heifers? And that is 1, until they become pregnant. Number 2, less than 90 days after being eligible. And I assume we'll define eligibility here in just a little bit. 90 to 120 days after eligibility, 120, 150 days after eligibility, and 150 days or more after eligibility. So it looks like you've got 5 choices here. Corey, are you good? What would your comments be on the 5 choices?
Well, certainly if we would have asked this question 3 to 4 years ago versus today, I believe it would be a slightly different answer. Replacement prices have diminished somewhat. We're doing a great job getting pregnancies, so our pipelines are pretty full. So I think given today's economics, this window is shrunk some, in my opinion, but we'll see where that is.
Yeah, Joe, what do you mean by after eligibility? Does that mean when they reach puberty, when you say eligibility, out of curiosity?
You know, it's a good point. It would be after they have received the green light to receive artificial insemination. So that determination would be different based on producers, and we'll talk about that. But if an animal is eligible, let's say today, then you would say, well, I'll give her 90 days or 150 days from today.
Okay.
Yes, so that's what the term eligibility means. Now, puberty is a different terminology because most people will not start that young because they are not of sufficient size yet.
Well, Jim's gonna close it and post the results. So,
okay.
Joe, what do you think here? It looks like we got a pretty wide variation.
We do have a pretty wide variation, and again, this is probably right in line with what I would expect. We have been conditioned, certainly as dairy producers and dairy employees, to offer as many opportunities as possible to generate pregnancies. So having the first one be 31% until pregnant doesn't surprise me at all. Less than 90 days after eligibility, 29%. This is very interesting because this goes along with what Corey mentioned in that we have many heifers in the pipeline. Reproduction has gotten better. Our management strategies are getting better. So we're getting to the point on some facilities of saying, hey, if they're not pregnant quickly, then they're going to calve too old and we're going to have problems. So that's good to see that we have people that are instituting limitations, and that 91 to 120 days doesn't surprise me. So very good results.
Chance?
Say it again.
In other words, would you is 151 days too long for you?
Well, what it comes down to is we have this juggling act of when AI eligibility begins, and then how long the eligibility period is relative to when that age at first conception and age at calving occurs. So with longer periods of time, there's more wiggle room, which means there's more variation among animals that calve, which means we tend to have some very old animals calving. So yes. So yes, that's a very good question. I'm glad you asked for that clarification. Okay, so we're getting into, if you haven't kind of seen this yet, we're getting into this idea that time is really important. And time is important throughout this calf and replacement heifer's life. Certainly on a large scale, from birth to entry to the AI pen. And that's that AI eligibility date. So that's very important. But that's not it. When an animal is eligible or becomes eligible by entry into the AI pen, until first AI occurs, is it 5 days or 7 days or 30 days? All of that has an importance because, again, we are feeding them and we are raising them. And then, of course, gestation or pregnancy is a fixed period of time. Age at conception, I mentioned earlier, is really where we should be focused rather than age at first calving, because age at conception will help us determine when that age at first calving is. And it's very simple. We can do that in our heads. If we have an average age at conception of approximately 14 months, then we do 14 months times 9 or plus 9 months to get an idea of when our average heifers would calve, and 14 plus 9 would give us 23 months of age. So I want to get everyone kind of thinking that this idea of timing is important, but there are not only the large picture of birth to entry to the AI pen, but also once that animal's in the AI pen, how soon do we actually get semen into that animal and achieve a pregnancy? So one of the things I'm going to discuss and borrow from lactating cows is this idea of working within a voluntary waiting period and working within an immediate pre-breeding period. So you can see on our graph here, it says pre-breeding period, and then that's on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, it says the AI breeding period. And you can imagine that green line is like a doorway. And the question, it's a rhetorical question here, is what are the criteria that you use for heifers to enter the AI pen to be eligible? So it could be height at the withers, it could be hip height, could be weight, it could be age, it could be a group of criteria that are used to allow heifers to become eligible. But my argument that I'm going to make in the next few slides is that we should be managing heifers, actually managing heifers in that immediate pre-breeding period, so that once they meet our criteria, we can inseminate them as quickly as possible, as close as possible to that green arrow. Again, I mentioned that I was going to borrow a little bit from our lactating cow management strategies, and it's very common to pre-synchronize lactating cows during the voluntary waiting period, during the period of time where we say we will manage them, but we will not inseminate them until they are eligible until they pass through that doorway. Pre-synchronization is an effective strategy to facilitate AI. It also has been known to increase fertility. And we can use this strategy either at a fixed time AI or after detection of estrus. And in lactating cows, probably the two most common pre-synchronization and therefore synchronization strategies also shown here would be pre-sync off-sync or double off-sync. And both of these systems work very, very well. And the first word on the left, pre-sync, from the pre-sync off-sync, occurs during that voluntary waiting period, during that immediate pre-breed period, as does the first off-sync of a double off-sync protocol. This idea of pre-synchronizing to set animals up so that we can inseminate them quickly after they're eligible and attain high fertility. So the first study we're going to talk about is a study of a former graduate student of mine, Courtney Claypool, and she did this for her master's. And we are going to talk about pre-synchronization of dairy heifers with a 14-day CIDR protocol. You can see on this slide we had 3 different treatments. This is the experimental plan. The top line shows our 14-day CIDR protocol. There were 119 animals in this group. On the very bottom, I'd like you to notice there are days of study shown from -30 to +7. And if we look at the top line again, a CIDR was put into the CIDR treatment animals, was inserted on day -30 and was left in for 14 days. And then those animals were allowed to come into heat without insemination. And on day 0, moving to the right along that goldish brown line, on day 0, that is day of AI eligibility. Those animals in the CIDR treatment that had been 16 days since CIDR removal. They received 1 injection of prostaglandin. And then we conducted estrus detection and artificial insemination for 7 days. The middle treatment that you see there is a prostaglandin treatment. There were 118 animals in this group. The animals received 1 injection of prostaglandin as a pre-synchronizing injection on day -11. 11 days later, on the day of eligibility, which is day 0, they received prostaglandin. That would be the second injection of prostaglandin. And then estrus detection and AI for 7 days. And then the last treatment is the control. The bottom line is what the heifer ranch where we did this research, what they were doing at this time. As we can see, there's 121 animals in this group. And this group received 1 prostaglandin injection on day 0, and then estrus detection and artificial insemination, just as the other treatments, for 7 days. So if we look at the distribution of detected estrus after CIDR removal, so this is for the 14-day CIDR treatment animals. After removing the CIDR, these are bars showing the percentage of animals in estrus after CIDR removal. And then days are shown on the x-axis. And we can see the distribution. On day 1, we had about almost 13% that were detected in estrus. On day 2, we had almost 56%. And then day 3, almost 19%. Day 4, 8.5%. Day 5, 1.7%. And then very few not detected. So what this is showing you is a very good distribution of detected estrus. It's very tight relative to the vast majority coming in within those first 3 days. And you can see that overall, over all the animals, 115 out of 119 were detected in estrus within those 5 days, almost 97% of animals. Now, we did not inseminate the animals after this detected estrus. And the plan was to allow them to come into heat, to detect them, and then to wait 16 days until they're eligible. And then on day 0, when they're eligible for AI, then give them a prostaglandin injection. So this was a pre-synchronization step. It was not a synchronization step. Okay, so let's go right to the results. These animals have gone through the doorway, if you will. They've all become eligible within their respective treatments. And we can see if we're looking at columns under treatment, we have 14-day CIDR, prostaglandin, and control. And if we're looking at items going from left to right, we're going to talk about detected in estrus. This would be the percentage detected in estrus during the first 7-day period. And then the next line is number of days to first AI, and that is the mean number of days. So we can see highlighted in different colors here, there was a difference in the proportion of animals detected in estrus based on treatment. We can see the 14-day CIDR heifers, almost 96% of them were detected in estrus during the first 7 days after AI eligibility. So these animals are past AI eligibility. Relative to our prostaglandin pre-synchronization treatment, which is in the middle column here, almost 75% were detected in estrus, which is a relatively very good expectation. And then from a standpoint of just one prostaglandin injection shown there on the right-hand side, that would be about 67%. So nothing surprising there. Very nice that we were able to have almost 96% in heat off the 14-day CIDR. There we go. And if we look down at days to first AI, again, this is going to that discussion of time and the importance of time. We can look in this first column. You can see the arrows there and the green highlight that we had fewest days to first AI, mean number of days to AI, about 3.6 days in this 14-day CIDR protocol. And then if we go to the center, you can see it was increased by about a day and a half for those animals that were pre-synchronized with prostaglandin. And then those animals that were in the control group who only received one injection on the day of eligibility, the mean day to first AI was approximately a little bit less than 7. Okay, moving on to the second, and this will be the final graph for this particular study. The table is set up exactly the same as the previous table. So we have CIDR, 14-day CIDR. Then to the right of it, we have prostaglandin, which is our pre-synchronizing prostaglandin treatment. And then we have our control treatment. And going from the left to right, we have our first row being pregnant at first AI, and then the second row being pregnant within the first 7 days. So we can see, shown here, that we have an effect of proportion pregnant at, or yes, the number pregnant at first AI, also proportion pregnant at first AI, 71, 72%. This would be commonly termed something like a conception rate or pregnancy per AI. And you can see that that's very good, 72%. Within the prostaglandin pre-synchronization treatment shown in the middle here, 58%. And then within the control group, almost 62%. Fertility is very good, shown here. Just as a point of reference, national average for Holsteins is in that 56 to 58% range for first AI. So everything here looks good. If we look at the second line, and now we're looking at the percentage or proportion that are pregnant within that first day. This is based on the entire group, whereas the previous line was based on those that were inseminated. We can see that we have almost 69% that became pregnant during that first week in the 14-day CIDR pre-synchronization treatment. Here we can see within the prostaglandin pre-synchronization treatment, about 43% of that group were pregnant within the first 7 days. And then moving over to the control group, we can see about 41%. Again, a difference based on treatment, an advantage, if you will, toward the 14-day CIDR treatment. So we did some preliminary economics on this work, on these results, and we're looking at this idea of days on feed. So we did a projected days on feed based on when pregnancy occurred and then added gestation to that. And we can see the table is set up exactly the same as the previous two tables. We can see the first line is the number that were pregnant during a 120-day breeding period, and we had approximately 86 to 92% pregnant. There was no difference between the total that were pregnant within each group. And then if we look at the next line, days on feed, and this is for pregnant heifers only, we can see that there again was an effective treatment. 14-day CIDR showed 295 days on feed, as compared to the prostaglandin pre-synchronization treatment in the center at 302, and then the control treatment, which they only had prostaglandin on day of entry, at 305. So if we want to look at the extremes between our 14-day CIDR treatment and our control treatment, there's evidence there of a decreased days on feed of 10 days. So let's wrap this portion of the webinar up, this first study. The conclusions would be that pre-synchronization with a 14-day CIDR, followed 16 days later by a single prostaglandin injection on the day of entry to the AI pen, appears to be an effective strategy to increase the proportion pregnant at first AI, to increase the proportion pregnant within the first 7 days, and to potentially decrease days on feed. So the second synchronization strategy that we're going to talk about today is synchronized ovulation for first insemination, improves reproductive performance and reduces cost per pregnancy in dairy heifers. This is work done jointly between University of Florida and University of Illinois, published in the Journal of Dairy Science. And the experimental plan is shown here. There were 2 treatments. You can see the top line going from left to right is the timed AI treatment. There were approximately 300 animals, 305 animals in this treatment. Once again, the graph is set up very similar to the previous research project. You have day of study along the bottom of the graph. And this research group started at day -6 with a CIDR injection, with a GnRH injection at the time of CIDR insertion. The CIDRs remained in place for 5 days and were removed on day -1. A prostaglandin injection was given at that time, and then a second prostaglandin injection was given 24 hours later on day 0. Day 0 is day of entry to the AI pen, or day of AI eligibility. For this top program, these animals were detected in estrus across time, and animals not seen in estrus on that first day then were submitted to a timed AI, GnRH plus AI, as you can see there on day 2. And then they were followed for 84 days total. And that would be the far right ending point. Our control animals numbered 306. And on the day of entry to the AI pen, they received no treatment. They were eligible for estrus detection and AI. And on day 7, if they had not been seen in heat, then they received prostaglandin, 1 injection, and then they moved through the breeding period until day 84 after eligibility. Excuse me. Okay, so this table is set up very similarly to the previous tables we've already seen. And you can see that we have in the center column here, this is the timed AI treatment. In the far right column, we have the control treatment. And then we have numerous different items we're going to talk about here. If we go down to this first line, we can see highlighted by different colors, the mean number of days to first AI was different between timed AI and control. This is not surprising, given the way timed AI programs are set up. They're specifically set up for appointment breeding. This one was set up to manage animals in the immediate pre-breeding period and then to have timed AI occur at approximately day 2. The reason why we see days to first AI less than 2 is because there were a few animals that came into heat on day 1 and they went ahead and inseminated them. Nevertheless, the treatments did what they should have done. No surprise there on that first line. On the second line, the proportion pregnant at first AI, there is no difference between the timed AI and control, 62.8% and 58.3%. All these animals appeared to be randomly distributed and were very healthy and ready to go. If we look at the third line here, days to pregnancy, I'm highlighting it with the arrow now. This would be mean days to pregnancy. Again, would be sooner based on the timed AI protocol shown here as compared to the control group shown here. And then if we want to go down here and parse it out a little bit more and talk about this idea of the 21-day pregnancy rate, a common measurement we use in record keeping, whether we're using Dairy Comp or DHI Plus, etc. The 21-day pregnancy rate shown here shows that the timed AI group had an advantage. The higher the number, the faster we are getting heifers pregnant. Both of those numbers, 57% and 47%, are actually very good. And this number is largely so good because of this idea of appointment breeding. You increase the submission risk, you increase the insemination rate by timed AI, and that helps increase pregnancy rate and gather pregnancies sooner. So Silva and co-workers did an economic analysis and looked at cost per pregnancy at 84 days. This is across all the animals that were in the treatment. And we can see along this graph or along this table, it's set up essentially the same. We have timed AI in this column here shown by the arrow. We have control data shown in this column on the extreme right. We can see the difference in cost for synchronization. For this protocol, the cost was approximately $14, okay? I will highlight that by this dagger shown here, that this includes a second use CIDR. So this CIDR was discounted over a first use CIDR. But nevertheless, we can see an obvious difference in synchronization cost relative to control animals, not surprising. Okay, Silva and co-workers then parsed out detection of estrus costs, semen and AI, pregnancy diagnosis, and show these numbers here. Really where we want to go is getting to that idea of how much is feed costing us, because feed is so expensive within our relative heifer raising enterprise. And you can see the calculations shown here. Feed is markedly less for those animals that were in the timed AI treatment as compared to those animals in the control treatment. And if we do some math between the control and the timed AI treatment, we have a $17 advantage, or $17 less invested to generate a pregnancy at 84 days of age, looking at that entire breeding period. So obviously, the take home from this is that an economic advantage to this protocol used in this situation. So conclusions from this second synchronization strategy would be that compared with AI after detected estrus, implementation of a 5-day CIDR timed AI protocol beginning on day -6 before entry to the AI program on day 0 results in similar proportion pregnant at first AI. Okay, didn't see a fertility difference, similar proportion pregnant, but there was a reduced days to pregnancy, an improved 21-day pregnancy rate, meaning we're gathering up pregnant heifers faster, and ultimately a reduced cost per pregnancy generated. What I want to make sure that we understand as we move on to some management considerations here is that both of these studies managed heifers in the immediate pre-breeding period. The first study on day -30 by insertion of a CIDR, and then this study on day -6 by insertion of a CIDR. Getting to this idea of trying to gather up pregnant animals as quickly as possible. So, some management considerations. Of course, anytime we're talking about inseminating heifers, trying to generate pregnancies within heifers, we've got to be concerned with heifer development. Okay, we could spend many hours talking about heifer development, and certainly there are many people that are much well versed in this that could do it better than me. The idea here is, are heifers being developed within our system and meeting targets? And is this the strategy that we want to use? The second point there is, what are our criteria to enter the AI pen? Is it age? Is it height it withers, hip height? Is it weight? Is it a combination of those things? What is the variation of animals that we put into an AI program? Is there large variation? How often do we do that? The third bullet point shown here, what about facilities and flow? Okay, we're talking about managing animals in the immediate pre-breed period in this webinar. That presents some issues with facilities and flow. There's no question. How do we have animals move, whether it's on the home dairy or a heifer lot or at a commercial heifer ranch? How do we move them from pen to pen to pen? Are there lockups? Do we have the ability to move animals efficiently? Do we have the personnel to do that? So all of those factors play a huge role. Okay, are they moving from perhaps one geographic location to another geographic location? That happens many times because AI service occurs only in some pens as opposed to other pens. The fourth bullet point shown there, what about personnel? How many people do we have devoted to the heifer raising operation? How many do we have that work on a daily basis as these animals near AI eligibility? Obviously, the protocol shown here, take a repro crew and take a crew that is well trained and have the ability to work with potentially large groups of animals to not only give injections, to insert CIDRs, and then of course to be able to thaw semen and load guns and breed heifers, a whole bunch of them within that first week. And then another place that we really need to be aware of is, where are we currently with our heifers? What are our current fertility metrics? So what is our fertility at first service? What is our 21-day pregnancy rate for our heifers? And that's really incredibly important, because we need to know where we are currently to be able to plan where we want to go. Again, we need to know where we are currently to be able to plan where we want to go. Otherwise, it's kind of this black box, and we won't really know if the results are better or worse or the same. So we're rounding the corner here. Take-home messages. Feed is up to 64% of total costs of raising replacement heifers. Research shows this. Feed is the largest expense. We really should be focusing on age at conception, and that includes an understanding of how to develop heifers so that they can reach a reasonable age at conception, rather than this old idea of focusing on age at first calving. Again, age at first calving will be determined by age at conception for those heifers. It's readily apparent that a delay in age at conception will lead to a delay in age at first calving. Okay, that's very simple. Everyone can understand that. And then, of course, that is going to result in increased rearing costs and then lost income opportunity. So that third bullet point kind of sums up that delay in age at conception and what occurs if that occurs. 2 bullet points wrapping this up relative to the synchronization strategies we talked about. The first bullet point deals with 14-day CIDR pre-synchronization. If that's followed by prostaglandin 16 days later and then AI upon detected estrus, it appears to be an effective strategy to generate pregnancies in a timely manner. Okay. On the other hand, research at University of Florida and University of Illinois shows us that the 5-day CIDR timed AI protocol, when initiated 6 days prior to entry to the AI program, and with timed AI on day 2, results in fewer days to first AI and pregnancy, and a cost per pregnancy $17 less than heifers that received AI following detected estrus. So some advantages shown there by this research. But wait, there's more. There's always more occurring, and this is a recent publication from the Journal of Therogenology. This is coming out of the University of Florida. And Jose Santos's group is working on a pre-synchronization protocol specifically for the 5-day timed AI protocol that we just talked about. So they are talking about adding a prostaglandin injection before the 5-day CIDR is put in place and the initial GnRH is given, in the hopes of increasing fertility on the back end. Again, getting to that idea of pre-synchronizing animals to try and increase fertility and also try and facilitate AI.
Well, we have a couple of questions that came in ahead of time here, Joe, so I will give you a chance to rest your voice a bit here. Here's the first question that came in from Ron in Georgia, and he said, minimizing calf and heifer rearing costs is a constant conversation. What are your thoughts on balancing age of first calving, which means probably early, ensuring they are big enough, adequate size, and any impact it would have on achieving optimal milk production in the first and the subsequent lactations?
Okay. This is the whole kit and caboodle. This is the huge melting pot. It's a great question, and it's also a question that boy, we could talk about for days and days and days. I would prefer to refer Ron and others interested in this to some readily available materials. One is shown here on this slide from the Dairy Calf and Heifer Association. You can see the web address there. And there are some gold standards that have been put together by those scientists, industry personnel, producers have been involved, heifer raisers have been involved in developing these. And they're not only performance standards, so getting to the point of the mix of age and height, and whether it's wither height or hip height or weight, and how to use those criteria and which criteria tend to offer the best results. But also some production standards are in this and how to achieve that. I would caution, we have in the past many times, and certainly on dairies that I worked on many years ago, we tended to use age quite a bit, looking at either the records or looking at ear tag, birth date. And that's probably the least sensitive. So I would say we need to have better strategies, potentially multiple criteria, as previously mentioned, so that we could optimize, again, not only fertility, but lactations.
We have another question that came in ahead of time, and I think our listeners know that you can send questions in ahead of time, and at times we will show these during the presentation as we are right now. A question from Sam in Texas. Do you know of any practical ways to synchronize heifers for a second breeding following the first AI using a CIDR sync approach? In this particular case, I'd like to carry out one more AI service before natural service sires are put in with the heifers in the breeding pen. Comments?
Okay, great question. So yes, so the linchpin here, what you really have to have is pregnancy diagnosis. So what you would do is then you would couple the pregnancy diagnosis by the herd veterinarian with a 5-day CIDR timed AI protocol. This has been researched, it works well. What you would do is on the day of pregnancy diagnosis by that herd veterinarian, those animals that are determined to be open would receive GnRH in a 5-day CIDR, and along you would go along the protocol. Having said that, I'm glad that the second portion of this question, the statement is in here about how you'd like to carry out one more AI before natural service sires are put in. In general, research that has been done on number of AI services prior to addition of cleanup bulls shows that it's almost always beneficial, if not always beneficial, to add one more AI. So if you have one AI, you're better off adding 2 AIs. If you have 2 AIs, you're better off adding 3 AIs to limit the exposure of your animals to reduced genetics within the cleanup bull population. And then the other idea there is, I've worked with many bulls. Bulls are incredibly dangerous. They kill people every year. And also, we need to do breeding soundness evaluations on bulls prior to use of those bulls. So that kind of covers both areas there. Thank you for that question. Okay, so now there is more places, I'm sorry, where we can go for information, not only for heifers, but for lactating cows. Dairy Cattle Reproduction Council, shown here. We can see the web address. And for those of you that want a little more information on some common synchronization protocols, at this web address shown on this slide, there is a handout that shows prostaglandin and estrus detection in AI, the 5-day CIDR protocols, etc. And it also shows calendars on the bottom. An excellent idea for those of you that have not synchronized before or that synchronize very much or not very much. Important to use calendars and to literally count on the calendars when management events need to occur. So that's available, Dairy Cattle Reproduction Council. And where can you get even more information? Penn State Extension has a huge volume of material on monitoring dairy heifer growth. You can see on the right-hand side, customized dairy heifer growth charts, growth monitors, how to use body condition scoring, etc. There's so much information here that is very good. It's very well thought out, well researched, and it can guide you going from point A to point B. How do I measure hip heights? How do I measure wither heights? How might I take a sample or a subsample of heifers within a pen and weigh them, and those types of ideas? And then how to chart growth of a group of heifers that you're raising. Fantastic opportunity for more information. Okay, Mike, are there some more questions we want to address now?
No, I think you should pretty much wrap up here, and then we'll turn it back to Corey, and then we'll come back, and you got a boatload of questions here.
Okay, sounds good. Well, thank you very much for everyone, and certainly thank you to Idaho Ag Experiment Station who helped fund the first project. Dairyman at M&M Feedlot, I've collaborated with him many times on research. Can't thank him enough. Jim Britton, our AI technician, Zoetis, and then our veterinarian, Dr. Vortman.
Well, thank you, Joe. We, with Mike gets ready with questions here, and Mike, if your voice goes out, just let me know and I can take the wheel here. But all of our webinars are archived, and to date, our archives have been viewed by, over 160,000 times. To view this webinar again, or any of our previous webinars, you may visit our archives at www.hoards.com/webinars, or you can just go to our homepage. You'll see the icon. After this webinar, you'll receive an email survey later this week. In that survey, you will have the opportunity to evaluate Joe's presentation and the topic. Your feedback is appreciated as it helps us select future topics and speakers. And I know we really use that information, and Patty and Jim are very good at tallying it. We hope you'll make plans to attend our July seminar on Monday, July 8th. The title of that presentation will be Treating Diarrhea in Dairy Calves, presented by Jeff Smith, North Carolina State University. And that webinar will be sponsored by TechMix. Mike, let's hear some questions.
Well, very good. We'll move forward. In the Claypool study, the question came in here. The preg rate was at 90% at 120 days. For some listeners, they thought that was a bit low. Your comments on that as far as the number of heifers that completed the program?
Okay, excellent question. And yes, we'd like it to be higher. There's no question about that, but essentially I went back and I looked at other heifer studies, and we commonly see within that 87% and higher total number pregnant over the defined period. And you've got to remember, this includes, of course, animals that didn't make it because something happened, they got sick, they got pneumonia, they got something like that. So they weren't able to finish out the protocol as a pregnant animal.
Also, in the Claypool study, the question came in about how was estrus detection done? It looked like there was tail painting on one of the studies, but I'm not sure if that's true on both of them.
Excellent. Tail paint was done on both studies, not only the Claypool study, but the Silva study. And the inseminator for the Claypool study was one inseminator with over 40 years experience who did both detection of estrus and insemination. And relative to heavy insemination days, this inseminator works with another technician, and the second technician does not breed. The second technician thaws straws, loads guns, and we had only one inseminator.
Still in the Claypool study, the question is, there was 4 heifers. It looked like there was 4 heifers that in the pre-sync group that didn't respond. And then when we went to get pregnant, there was another 4 heifers. Were they the same 4 heifers?
You know, I believe so. I believe so. I'd have to go back and specifically look at that. But yes, I believe so.
Okay, another question on the Claypool study, and I'm going to be cautious on this one. What were the cost differences per pregnancy, considering the aggressive treatment program? And I will read all those injections to you over on the line because you know who they are, and services
Yeah.
per conception.
Okay, so great question relative to what were the costs. We did a preliminary partial budget relative to the extremes, relative to the control, which was the prostaglandin on day 0, and also the 14-day CIDR. There was a 10-day difference in days on feed. And of course, within that partial budget, we included the cost of the synchronization program and labor and all those types of things. There was overall a $15 balance or a $15 advantage towards the 14-day CIDR.
Okay, still in the Claypool study, what type of prostaglandin was used in the study? And there are two rather large names here I will not pronounce unless you want me to do that. Can you answer that question?
Yes, I can. At the time, on this heifer ranch and working with Zoetis, we used Lutalice.
Okay, because they have something like Dinoprost and
It would be. It's Dinoprost tromethamine. Yes.
Whoa, that's a big name as far as that goes. Last question with the Claypool. Any comments why the percentage in heat after 2 shots of PGF was only 74.6%?
Yo, great question. Great question. Yes, it's within the normal range. It's probably on a little bit on the lower end, but we went back to look within the literature and within our own data here to see what is that range. And it's still within the range of normal. We would expect a little bit more, just given that we're assuming that first injection will set them up for the second injection. We didn't happen to see that, but looking back in the literature, like I said, it's within that normal range.
Just a comment, and then we'll move on to a question. In our group, a comment came in and said, using only the off-sync program, we have 90% effectiveness for our listeners for what it's worth. And I'm not sure we need to comment on. Here's another question for you, though. And when using a sex semen in a timed AI protocol, do you recommend to delay insemination 4 to 6 hours?
Okay. It depends on the timed AI protocol. And this Silva data showed acceptable use of sex semen within their timed AI protocol. So within the Claypool data, no, there was no sex semen used. It was only conventional semen. Within the Silva data, they used it. They did not vary the time. They went by the book, so to speak. But in general, depending upon your protocol, and I know they're all over the map, there have been people that have had greater success by AIing with sex semen a little bit later than they would with conventional.
Okay, we're going to change gears here a little bit, and that is microtoxins like zearalenone. Will they affect heifer fertility the same as cow fertility, or any comments on that?
I believe they will, but I am pretty ignorant on feedstuffs, so I'm going to stop right there.
Okay. The one came from one of Australian group, and he says we can breed Australian Holsteins at 11 months of age with 350 kilos of weight, and we can work that out in 125 centimeters. I want to make those conversions for it. And does it produce complications at calving? And does it have any relationship with milk production in the first lactation? So they're getting them pretty young, Joe.
Yeah. This happens, and I think we can do it. The question becomes, is how big are our animals? And we know that animals that perhaps have some genetic influence that's different in one region of the US or one region of the world, they could be bigger or smaller, or need to be bigger or could be bigger or smaller. Because again, puberty is based on percentage of mature body weight. And also we've got to figure out what is that mature size and frame size. So is there variation within breed across geography? Of course there is. And the question that I would have, or the statement I would make, is that keep good data and develop your animals the way you believe they should be developed within reason, and then keep good data all the way through transition and see how they do for you. There is no cookie cutter approach even within a breed, certainly based on geography, feedstuffs, development speed, all those types of things, whether it's the accelerated development, etc. So I'm glad to see people are doing different things, but yeah, there's too many problems, potential problems, to make a blanket recommendation.
What are the maximum inseminations that we can use to declare a heifer a repeat breeder or stop breeding her? Any guidelines on that?
Great question. Thank you for asking that. We did a recent study where we looked for markers, SNPs, on heifers that conceived at first service to 1 AI, and then those that needed 4 or more or never became pregnant. And we saw a difference in the markers on those animals that conceived to first service at 1 AI. So does that mean that you should give them all 4? I can't say that because we don't have data from 2, 3, and 4. We only have data from the extremes, 1 and 4. But what that tells me is that animals that need 4 or more, they're likely different. And I don't know that I would include those animals. I would give them much more chances. And the way you can look at this at home is you can look at your own heifers, and likely you see a stair step from first service conception to second to third to fourth, and it likely precipitously drops off as you go either from second to third or third to fourth. It's common what I see.
Here's an unusual one, to me at least. I've heard people using sheep CIDRs for synchronizing heifers in an IVF program setup for the recips. Have you come across this? Any comments?
I have not. And I know that, and part of the reason I have not, I believe it is because of restricted use of various pharmaceuticals domestically in the US. We have essentially only one CIDR product available, as opposed to other regions of the world that have multiple CIDR products available. So I have not, but it doesn't surprise me that it's being used, but I'm not aware of it, and I'm not aware of the data.
A little different question, that is pregnancy loss on heifers versus pregnancy loss on cows. What do you expect to see? Cows are modestly high after the first insemination. Any thoughts on that?
So in heifers, pregnancy loss is very low. Usually, it's usually only a couple percent, 2 to 3%. Most research that I've seen for heifers has it very, very low. Pregnancy loss for cattle can certainly be much higher and is a concern. And it's certainly in a wide variety of studies can be 10%, 20% or higher. One of probably the most telling categories is to look at, we know from embryo transfer studies that we don't have problems getting the eggs or getting the ovum to be conceived, to have a conception, but the problem is getting that cow to calve. Certainly in a lactating cow situation, because fertilization is very, very high and it remains high in cattle. The problem is this pregnancy loss. But in heifers, no, we generally don't see a problem in heifers for the most part, and it tends to be 5% or less.
Very good. When do you give the prostaglandin as pre-sync before day 5 in the CIDR synchronization program versus day 7? Can you?
Oh, okay. So that new study, the new study, I believe it was either 2 or 3 days ahead. I don't remember it exactly. It was either 2 or 3 days ahead before the GnRH injection. And that study, I just came across that recently. So I'm not as up on that. I did not summarize it for this, but I wanted to mention it because it's what's happening now. People are trying to refine this. I have not worked with it.
Do you have any protocol differences between breeds? One breed, say Holstein versus Jerseys or crossbreeding. Any different protocols on those heifers as far as getting them ready?
Another great question. I have not seen research describing recommended protocols to be different between the common breeds, let's say Holsteins and Jerseys or something like that. Within crossbreds, I have not seen any data on that either. I will say we do know animals that have Bos indicus influence. We do know that there are protocols that are different, that work better in those animals than animals that are Bos taurus. So certainly within South America, within Australia, New Zealand, some other areas where some dairy animals might have Bos indicus influence, protocols could very well need to be tweaked a little bit. Yes, but not within breed that we normally work with within North America and domestically.
Okay. Can you explain further the second use CIDR?
Sure.
What that means?
Sure. That's a great question. So CIDRs are labeled for single use. That literally means using in one animal and then removing and disposing of it. There has been numerous questions over the years whether these CIDRs that have been used in one animal retain efficacy and can be used a second time in a completely different animal. And the way that has been accomplished in research is essentially the CIDR is cleaned and then dried, and then that CIDR would be inserted into a second animal. Having said that, what ends up happening then is you have an item which on the open market costs approximately $10 or $11 per CIDR, then would have a cost associated with it of approximately half that because you've used it twice.
Okay, the last question goes back to the Claypool study about the AM-PM breeding. Is that the protocol used, observed in the AM, breed in the PM, or was it a once-a-day breeding program on the Claypool study? That would be your study.
Thank you very much for asking that. It was once a day and it was in the morning. It was not an AM-PM. It was an AI technician comes by and reads the tail paint, and then from there inseminated right after making the list of animals that were detected in estrus. So it was only AM breedings. And thank you again for making that question. That's important.
And then the last question goes back to the use of the CIDR again. How do you store them, and do you get the same effectiveness if you use them twice versus once?
Okay, very good. I'm going to respectfully decline to describe how to store them because it's probably not my place to do that. But are they as effective? Okay, there's research that shows not only domestically, so in the United States, but there's research internationally with a wide variety of CIDR products, those that are available in the US and those that are available internationally that may not be available in the US, that they retain effectiveness. Okay, and that would mean by measuring of progesterone, that research has been done. but it's not my place to describe how to do it. That would be a discussion that you would need to have within your management team and with your veterinarian.
Well, very good, Joe. You've done a yeoman's job. We went through a boatload of questions here. Corey, we'll let you kind of wrap up the webinar, if you would, please.
Well, let's thank you to the listeners for tuning into this great presentation by University of Idaho's Joe Dalton. We'll be getting together again next month, July 8th at noon Central Time, to talk about treating diarrhea in calves. We hope you'll join us for that webinar right after the 4th of July here in Independence Day in the United States. Until next time, farewell from all of us here at Hoards Dairyman and our co-hosts and friends from the University of Illinois. Have a great Monday.